Look, I'm interested in the rollout of the Australian Government guidelines on the recognition of sex and gender, where the guidelines applying to all government departments and agencies that maintain personal records, including employee records, and or collect sex and or gender information. So I understand these guidelines were due to be completed on the 1st of July last year. Is that the case?
The guidelines are in existence already, Senator.
Okay, the guidelines that existed, all right, so I think it's the personal records, so standardising the evidence requiring the personal records, so in terms of forms that they need to fill in to have another option other than male or female on government forms and personal records held by Australian government departments and agencies.
Senator Andrew Walter, Assistant Secretary, Civil Law Unit. Yes, the guidelines provided for, I guess, a progressive rollout, which was scheduled to finish on the 1st of July 2016, bearing in mind that they are quite literally guidelines. They're not mandatory. They don't, departments aren't required to do this, but the guidelines did envisage that they'd be progressively implemented up to the 1st of July.
I think the information I've got, so they commenced on the 1st of July 2013,
That's
updated
right.
in 2015, and that agencies were to progressively align their existing and future business practices with the guidelines by the 1st of July, which is obviously now 10 months ago. So I was concerned to hear of a Victorian constituent earlier this year who was engaging with the Department of Health and Human Services and who found that they didn't have an option to select a non-binary gender option on an official form, which they were providing their details on, which was very distressing to them. So are you aware of this issue with DHS?
I wasn't aware of that specific issue, no, Senator, but perhaps it would help you to know that the department has commenced a review of implementation of the guidelines. We had intended to kick that off last year, but quite frankly, it came down to we didn't have the resources to do it. I have now a couple of my officers working on that review. And the starting point for that review is actually to talk to those people in the community who rely on the guidelines. So we've been making contact with a range of representative groups, but also, more importantly, individuals who've had experience of using or not being able to rely on the guidelines and what their experience is, and so trying to take a kind of holistic view of how this is working for people.
But given the guidelines are meant to have been in place for the last 10 months, can you imagine that, you can't consult with everybody, there's a whole range of people who aren't going to know whether they're filling out a government form. Do you understand that DHS incident to be just an isolated incident, or are there more incidences across the board?
So we don't have a strong sense of that yet. So part of this review process is to, we're starting with people's experience as much as we can, and yes, of course, we can't talk to everyone. The next step is to talk to government agencies about how they're going implementing the guidelines and getting a better sense of where it's happening, where it's not. We have a for want of a better term, an advice line, a dedicated advice line for the guidelines. We don't kind of record every, time someone calls us, but my sense with that has been over the last 12 months, the number of calls we get from people for advice on the guidelines has dropped off. Which seems to me to indicate not necessarily a lack of awareness, but actually a more common acceptance across the public service of those guidelines. But that's something we need to test, and that's what we'll be testing as part of the review.
Okay, so in terms of those calls, so are they from the agencies wanting to know what to do, or are they from individuals who are having problems with agencies?
It can be both.
So do you have any sense as to whether it's just been DHS that's been slow to roll out the guidelines?
No, I think it would be fair to say that there are instances that occur across the public service, and sometimes, it seems that there might be within certain agencies good areas of practice and not so good areas of practice.
But you don't have an understanding at the moment as to
we
where
don't have that holistic view yet, and that's something we need to try. We won't get everyone, obviously, but we want to get a much better sense of how's this working, what impediments are there to their implementation? Are there things that are causing particular problems, or is it as simple as an awareness and education issue?
So you don't know at the moment what the hold-up has been? Is it, I mean, you said that in terms of following up on the implementation of them, you didn't have the resources to do that. I think you
No,
said
but we've
earlier
started
on.
that work now. So
Right.
at this point, I'm not in a position to give you any information about that because we literally have not spoken to agencies, but we will be doing so over the
I
coming
mean, it has
months.
been almost 3 years since the guidelines were first introduced, so it's
quite
just
so.
generally not been a priority.
Can I put it this way, that there have been other things that have been a priority rather than it's not a priority? It's something that we are very actively aware that we hadn't done, and we think it's important, and we think it's the feedback anecdotally we get is it makes a difference to people.
Absolutely.
And so we see it as a very important bit of work. So I don't want to suggest for a moment it's not a priority.
But it hasn't been up until now.
Senator, if I
Yes.
can say that, I
Okay.
mean, we're also talking about a range of different other Commonwealth departments and agencies amending their own information collection practices and procedures and systems. So it's partly a question of their ability to do that. That's not in our control.
No, but they've had 3 years to do it, and which was a very generous time for them to change their practices and systems. And it's distressing and disturbing to me to see that it hasn't been rolled out, obviously, by departments across the board, and that it's taken you this long to actually feel that you need to review it. So it's distressing to individuals who don't have an option to have their gender diversity represented on their information that they're giving to government.
That's absolutely understood, Senator, but we are doing an evaluation at the moment of how it's actually working, and we'll find out whether it's an isolated incident or not.
What's the timeline on your evaluation process?
So we haven't kind of put a deadline on it as such, which I don't want to make it sound quite as vague and
Not a
wishy-washy as
priority?
it does. No, that's, I think that would be unfair. So I have an officer who came on board in February of this year who's particularly focused on this, and the reason why I asked her to take on this piece of work is because she has a particular background in dealing with people with a whole range of issues and how they deal with government. And so she has more, she's got that kind of background and experience. So she's starting, as I said, with those user interviews as much as possible. And then we need to move on to that kind of surveying work with the department, the departments and agencies. But I'd like to see that wrapped up in the next few months.
Okay, so we should see some evaluation then by, what, 3-4 months' time, you were saying?
Yeah, I would hope that that's the
Okay,
case. Yeah.
perhaps by next estimates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even if we haven't kind of finished a formal report or whatever, I'll be in a much better position to give you some insights from
Okay.
what we've done there.
Thank you.